you want to speak. It's... Order, order. I call Sir Simon Clarke to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Betts, and I beg to move that this House has considered reform of the planning system. The housing shortage that we face in this country is the great crisis facing the United Kingdom today. Since 1973, house prices have more than tripled in real terms, with average house prices today reaching over £284,000. Just in the last 20 years, the ratio of house prices to incomes has more than doubled. The average household now faces paying more than 7 times their annual income for a home to call their own. In 2000, it was 3 times their incomes. And for the average individual, the statistics are even starker. The housing shortage means that the overwhelming majority of our young people today simply cannot hope to afford a home. It means that people cannot move to be closer to work or to their family. It means that people are stuck in cramped, unfit, and often unsafe homes throughout the country. This housing shortfall is strangling our economy and choking off the growth we need to restore our economic fortunes. Put simply, Mr. Betts, the housing shortage is making us all much, much poorer. And the only solution to this crisis is to build more homes. According to a Centre for Cities report, the UK has a shortfall of well over 4 million homes. And even with the government's target of 300,000 homes a year, that deficit would take at least half a century to fill, and sadly, we are nowhere near that number. Evidence from around the world shows the power of home building to make lives better for people right across the income spectrum. In 2016, Auckland liberalised its planning system and precipitated a boom in housing construction, which resulted in significantly lower rents 6 years later. Across the Atlantic in the United States, new buildings attracting more affluent residents have freed up the homes they used to live in, lowering demand and rents for homes across the entire market, even at lower incomes. And a Swedish study found the benefits of new housing are evenly distributed between residents from different income groups. However, how we actually get to building more homes is clearly far from simple. But what we do know is the planning system we have is not fit for purpose. So how do we reform it to get where we need to go? There is a growing consensus across the House that the planning system is holding us back from delivering the homes that we need, and fixing our outdated top-down and restrictive processes must now be a priority for both of the main parties and hopefully all parties in this House. But how do we do that? The first and most important thing is to make home building more popular with the British public. When asked, people across the country broadly support the idea of new housing. The 2020 British Social Attitudes Survey found that 58% of Britons want to see more home building, with only 25% inherently opposed. And yet, as colleagues will note, specific house building projects in one's own constituency always seem to attract far more opposition. Now, some of that opposition is unthinking, knee-jerk NIMBYism, and we should just have no time for it. But not all of it is unreasonable. Despite the benefits of new homes, existing residents see very little immediate benefit when development comes to their home area. They do, however, experience real costs, from crowded roads to overburdened surgeries, and sometimes they witness low-quality homes unceremoniously dumped on the edge of their town. I will give way, yes.
I don't disagree with a number of points he's made, but one of the concerns that people have at a local level in Suffolk and more generally about additional house building is that it very rarely comes with that additional infrastructure that he mentions. So more houses are built, but there's more pressure put on the local infrastructure in terms of schools, hospitals, GP surgeries, and indeed the roads. So what would he suggest would be a mechanism to change that? So if people do accept more house building, they actually get the infrastructure that's needed.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question, because he's absolutely right, and I've seen it in my own constituency, where a new GP surgery in Nunthorpe, which is a suburb in the south of the town, has really changed people's attitudes to new homes coming in. But we need to institutionalise that sort of offer to residents, and the planning system must deliver a worthwhile settlement, one that gives residents a reason to say yes to extra homes. And The government has legislated for one important potential solution, which is community land auctions, or CLAs. CLAs allow local government to see a substantial share of the profits from new development. They enable local authorities to capture the uplift in value that comes from planning permission being granted. The value of agricultural land can rise by up to 80 or 100 times, and the council getting their fair share of that increase in the underlying land value allows them to deliver benefits to local people. They can then spend that on the new infrastructure, which my honourable friend rightly says is essential to make new developments viable. Residents then get to see their fair share of the upside too, while the country sees homes unlocked with more community support. And I hope to see the government press on and make the most of the Levelling Up Bill by getting trials of CLAs moving quickly, because I do think they have huge potential.
Will you give way?
I will give way, yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Decisions and policies are most trusted when the people making them are representatives of the people affected by them. This quote is from a civil service training manual. So does the honourable member agree with me that we need to ensure localism remains in the planning process?
I think localism as a principle of good government is a very important one, and I'm a strong believer in the mayoral devolution of the kind that the government has introduced over recent years. But I'll come to her question about how we can best address the balance between local and national government, because I think local government can be a very good thing, but it can also become an obstacle to actually building any homes anywhere at all, and that's something we do need to try and balance here. Yes, of course. It wouldn't be a debate without this.
Mr Chairman, can I commend the right honourable gentleman for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland for bringing this forward. I know the rules, Mr Chairman, for planning in the mainland here are slightly different from Northern Ireland. The same principle that the right honourable member is referring to are important. So I sympathise with the comments and particularly the time that it takes for a planning application to be granted fully. I have a close relationship with the local planners in my area through the council, but also a very close relationship with numerous developers and builders in my area as well. Because there's a tradition of building in my constituency. The frustration is understood in terms of timescales. So does the right honourable member agree that one of the most pivotal ways in which we could reform our planning system is by ensuring that councils are funded adequately to ensure a more robust planning approval process? Councils have a key role to play. Let's make sure they're part of it.
I totally agree with the honourable gentleman. He's exactly right. Councils need to have the planning departments in order to process the applications, and too often, as we know, good planners are poached by consultancies when they are needed in our local government system. The answer to that is, I think, to allow local authorities to capture more of the upside financially from new homes being built, precisely so they can fund the requisite staff and expertise, and I see the Honourable Lady for St Albans nodding, to do exactly what the Honourable Gentleman refers to. I'll give way.
Thank you. Thank you for giving way. He will, I'm sure, be aware that there is a government-imposed cap on how much money local councils can charge big developers when they put in an application. That led to a situation in my constituency of St Albans where my constituents, or in the constituents of the district, were subsidising big developers to the tune of £3 million per year. The government has now increased that cap, but they have not scrapped the cap, and councils can still not recoup the full cost of processing an application. Would he support a measure to actually scrap the cap altogether?
Well, I think it's a very reasonable question. I would need to look at the detail of the policy to see whether simply raising the cap further or scrapping it would be the best solution to the problem. But do I accept entirely that we need to make sure that councils are not cross-subsidising the cost of development, but rather are incentivised to welcome good development? Yes, I do. Another important piece of the puzzle that we should consider, Mr Betts, is leasehold reform. And I thought my honourable friend for North East Derbyshire spoke brilliantly on this issue in the House last week. Although nominally owners, the relationship between leaseholders and freeholders often resembles that of a landlord and tenant, and there is too little protection against drastically increased service charges and few incentives for freeholders to properly maintain a building. Secure and fair property rights are a core Conservative principle, and the government is making great strides here with the Leasehold Reform Bill. It is absolutely right that we're fixing the balance and ensuring that once people get on the property ladder, their home is truly theirs. I would encourage the government to go further and welcome the common hold system, where leaseholders all own a share in the common development. But we must address the fact that leasehold reform is vital. We should also address the fact that new homes in Britain are too often homes of low quality. Poor quality designs leave both new and existing residents alike feeling that new homes are too often nothing more than ugly boxes. And we should be looking seriously at how design codes can ameliorate this. For example, we could allow individual streets or areas to vote on a design code for new housing. Establishing preset and pre-approved design rules ahead of time would allow everyone on the street a chance to see a large share of the potential uplift, while also significantly increasing the number of homes built. And design codes could also increase housing through densification, rather than relying on outward suburban sprawl, which also reduces potential dependence on cars and would allow more green space to be preserved. And going to the point that we've just discussed in this debate, even if the public is on board, local authorities need to be as well. Councils are vulnerable to particularly local activism, even if it's a minority opinion among residents. And any reform will need to empower councils to take long-term decisions in the interest of their area, giving them the tools to get the right outcome from new development, incentivising them to say yes where it is appropriate, while ensuring that a few bad apples can't shirk their responsibility to allow more homes. Because our councillors, Mr Betts, as you know, really matter. And just recently, I've had reason to feel considerable frustration in my own planning authority in Redcar and Cleveland. The baffling decision made by the chair of that authority to delay the consideration of the proposed new British Steel electric arc furnace at Redcar reflects the power that councillors can have for good or for ill. And we certainly want to make sure that their natural incentives are to welcome investment. To do that, we need to ensure that development plans are brought up to date everywhere. These plans allow builders a measure of certainty when deciding where to construct new homes, but they're often not up to date. Unfortunately, the consequences under current law of an authority not having an up-to-date plan are often trivial. One possible remedy comes from California, the so-called builder's remedy. Under this policy, if an area fails to plan for enough homes, they must approve any housing project that contains at least 20% low-income or 100% middle-income housing. And this solution can be extremely effective. A few weeks of the builder's remedy in Santa Monica resulted in more affordable housing being approved than had been in the previous 7 years. And I certainly favour restoring a presumption in favour of development wherever an up-to-date local plan is not in place. Yes, I'll give way.
Thank you. I thank you, the Honourable Member, for giving way once again. I wouldn't be a Somerset representative if I didn't mention the issue of the phosphate levels on the Somerset Levels and Moors Ramsar catchment area caused by water and phosphates entering the water system. And it's stymieing building of new homes in parts of Somerset. And so we no longer have that 5-year housing land supply. So it does mean that the local plans are effectively suspended and the local planning authority is forced to approve inappropriate new housing development in areas where they would normally be refused. But does the Honourable Member agree with me that in these circumstances the local planning authority should be afforded better protection from the 5-year housing land supply requirements?
I confess I think the answer to these issues surrounding phosphate and nutrient neutrality are they need to be addressed. Indeed, I've commented on this with my right honourable friend, the member for Newark, this morning, by addressing the underlying causes of these problems and allowing mitigation measures to be put in place and then counted forward so that homes can still be built where it is appropriate, so we don't end up in a situation where authorities end up permissioning homes either where it's not appropriate or not permissioning homes at all. I do think we need to resolve the Gordian knot of nutrient neutrality, because it is an irrational obstacle to building new homes. It is something that we've created through policy and which we need to resolve through policy as well. The government has said, and I think rightly, Mr Betts, that development plans ought to prioritise building in cities, and I really welcome the exciting plans set out by my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, for new developments, major new developments in East London and in Cambridge. This is precisely the kind of visionary development that we need and should welcome, and I think would command broad support. Demand is obviously highest for homes closest to city centres, where jobs are located, and so these new homes often contribute disproportionately to economic growth. Building in cities also means less money is required to support the infrastructure needs of new residents, and it's environmentally friendlier too. Urban, dense communities inherently encourage lower usage of energy, because living in a smaller space means less to heat, living in an apartment building means natural insulation from other units, and so on. Estate regeneration is also a win-win way to add more housing in cities and to deliver social justice. Too often, our council estates, post-war, are often impractical and prohibitively expensive to rehabilitate. However, redeveloping an estate with new private housing that helps to cross-subsidise a wider improvement of redevelopment social housing can result in a plan to deliver a really good outcome for all residents. And allowing tenants to vote on these plans would ensure their rights are protected while providing new and renovated homes of a kind which are desperately needed. But while a brownfield first policy is sensible, a brownfield only policy cannot be. And no debate on planning will be complete without my referencing the completely uncontroversial subject of the Greenbelt. While the Greenbelt was intended to prevent sprawl, I would submit, Mr. Betts, it has done the opposite. Today's Greenbelt, which is 3 times larger than London itself, causes a leapfrog effect, where individuals wanting to live in London end up settling in distant commuter towns instead. This increases transportation and climate costs, and parts of the Greenbelt, the disused car parks, the petrol stations, the dreary wastelands that make up what the Right Honourable Leader of the Opposition rightly calls the Grey Belt, are far from the natural paradise that some would have you believe. The Greenbelt, in truth, has the best spin doctors around, encouraging a widespread misapprehension that it's all beautiful green land, when in fact 11% of the UK's total brownfield land lies within the Greenbelt. I'll give way one more time and then I should make progress.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member. Would he accept that there are those of us who do not give that portrayal of the Greenbelt? There are some of us who are very clear that there are brownfield sites and there are developed sites within the Greenbelt, and most of our concern, as I'll come to later on, is about the undeveloped Greenbelt sites that have natural habitats.
Well, I'm strongly in favour, to the Honourable Lady's point, of making sure that we can better enshrine the protections for the areas of genuine natural beauty and community amenity, and not, if you like, have a reductive debate which simply suggests that the entirety of the Greenbelt is an untouchable, verdant paradise, because it is not all like the front of a box of Yorkshire tea. We all know it is a mixed area of land. It was a crude line on a map drawn in the late 40s with good intention, but with adverse consequences today, and we need to have a much more sophisticated debate, I would argue, about what is and is not tradable in that context. My own party needs to stop pretending that all the Greenbelt is valuable. I think it's bad policy and it's bad politics. And it's time that we started to look at releasing some grey belt land to provide us with the housing that we desperately need. The Honourable Lady for Mitcham and Morden, who's a fellow priced-out parliamentary champion and a friend, has done excellent work pointing out that some of the worst areas of blight in her constituency are actually characterised as Greenbelt. And of course, even where the planning system does allow developers to bring forward new homes, overly strict regulations can still strangle supply and push up prices. And year after year, conditions and requirements are added at every level, driving up costs without necessarily delivering higher quality. And perhaps the most egregious example of this comes from the Mayor of London's London Plan, where the dual aspect rules require every flat to have external windows on multiple walls. Now, clearly, inherently, that is desirable, but it comes with a cost. And if it restricts the number of homes being built, that intervention needs to be balanced against the wider social imperative of creating homes where they're most needed. Minimum space standards are another example. While young people in other countries live on their own in flats of 20, 25 square metres, in the UK they're forced to live with strangers in overcrowded HMOs because we've banned new flats of that size. And politicians need to be honest with the public and with ourselves about the options that exist here. And in the middle of a generation-defining supply crunch, we can't afford these rules. People would be much better off in small, modern and affordable flats of their own than ageing, chopped-up homes built over 100 years ago. I think we do need to nuance this debate. And Mr. Betts, we also need to talk about tax. Our main real estate taxes often feel to those priced out of home ownership as though they add insult to injury. Stamp duty, land tax and council tax both need fundamental reform. Stamp duty, as currently constituted, penalises houses every time that they move, meaning that some households will remain in homes which are too small and others in homes which are too large, in both cases for too long. Council tax is regressive, unfair, and fails to properly compensate local councils for increases in land or property value, undermining the incentive to add more housing. And given that all parties are frankly terrified of the effects of a revaluation politically, and haven't done so since I was a child of 7, we do need to look, I think, at fundamental reform of local government taxation, which is a major issue, I don't deny it, but it's something which is, at the moment, worsening the planning system as well as, I think, acting irrationally in terms of the tax system. Those taxes, I would submit, should be replaced with a proportional property tax, which would save households an average of over £500 a year and result in up to an extra 600,000 new homes over the next 5 years. So, Mr. Betts, I hope in this speech I've highlighted some easy, sometimes some controversial, but generally win-win solutions that we could use to help soothe our housing crisis. In the long run, there is no substitute for real root and branch reform of our planning system. Ultimately, I would favour a rules-based system along the lines set out by my right honourable friend, the member for Newark, when he was the Secretary of State for Housing. It was unfortunately opposition misrepresented those plans as a, and I quote, developer's charter. Frankly, if only they'd been allowed to be anything of the kind. Housing impacts every facet of our lives. Rising housing costs suppress productivity, increase wealth inequality, worsen climate change, and increase homelessness. And of course, people need to be together. And bringing people physically together is a social good, but people need homes to do so. So this isn't some abstract debate. Fixing it, I would submit, is a moral priority. And it ought also to be the top political priority for my own party, as it always was under Prime Ministers as different as Harold Macmillan and Margaret Thatcher. I do not know how we can make the case for popular conservatism when in too many areas of England people cannot accumulate capital in their own lives. I certainly feel that's why major political change may be brewing in parts of the country we've long called our heartlands. One need only contrast the recent success of the Canadian Conservatives to see the amazing difference embracing pro-home ownership policies can deliver, even among the youngest voters. The UK is falling behind in the quest for higher productivity and better wages, and at the moment we're only making ourselves poorer by refusing to meet one of our most basic human needs, a place to live. The UK needs innovation, we need infrastructure, and most of all, we need housing. But we're not going to get enough of it under the current system, and that's why the time for talking is over. We've made too little progress on effective planning reform over the last 14 years, and it's become clear to me that politicians are not holding ourselves sufficiently accountable on this issue. And that's why I'm delighted to announce that Priced Out, which is Britain's largest campaign for affordable new homes, will be publishing an index of members of Parliament in England running for re-election, ranking their performance on housing, planning and infrastructure issues. This will serve as a guide to voters up and down the country at the next election for just who this issue is a priority. And they have my support in bringing all of us in this House to account, because the country deserves a more serious debate than the one that we've had, and that we need it soon, before lasting harm is done to another generation by our collective unwillingness to deliver the serious planning reform that this country needs.
The question is that this House has considered reform of the planning system. Tim Farron.
Thank you, Mr Betts. It's an honour to serve under your guidance this morning, a very important debate, and pay tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland for championing this issue generally and for raising some very interesting points today, many of which I agreed with. So just in terms of the problem that we face, so in my constituency, the average house price is about 12 times the average household income. We have a situation where so much of the existing housing stock is not available for anybody to live in, make a home in and raise a family or to work locally. So, for example, over the last, 20 years, there's been a huge explosion in the number of second homes, homes that people from away live or own. And it's very nice for them that they can do that, but they don't, bless them, contribute into the local economy to the extent that those who live there full-time do. And then more recently, we've seen a real explosion in the number of short-term lets, which in itself isn't so awful, but it is awful when you see that they've gobbled up the long-term rented market in order to get into that situation. And so we see a decline in the number of homes that are available for people to live locally, wherever they're born, wherever they're originally from, but to set down roots and to contribute to our community, those evaporating, and the housing stock we already have, as I say, moving into usages that don't contribute to there being a full-time economy. That is miserable for families that are just effectively expelled from the communities in which they grew up. It's also economically stupid because we're left with a situation where, just to list hospitality and tourism as one particular sector, our largest employer in Cumbria, that 63% of hospitality and tourism businesses in Cumbria are operating currently below capacity not meeting the demand that is there, which is criminal in a difficult economic situation like this. There is demand, but it's not being met, simply because they don't have the staff, the workforce in order to contribute. That has an impact, of course, on health and social care. A fifth of all the care jobs in Cumbria are currently vacant, unfilled, and that is because, for a number of reasons, but principally because people on incomes in social care, for example, or the incomes that social care pay, it's just not enough to have a home anywhere near the communities, the lakes and the dales in south and central Cumbria. So the housing crisis is absolutely real. I think it's acute in a place like mine in particular, and we absolutely need action in terms of what we build that's new and in terms of what we do with the existing housing stock. So I agree very, very much with, if you like, the diagnosis of the problem that the Right Honourable Member has introduced. And I agree with some of what he said about the potential remedies. But what I don't agree, though, is that a free market approach is the answer. I think that housing is not a normal market. And to treat it like a normal demand and supply market is to misread what happens out there. Because what we have is a situation where if you have targets of additional housing, you say we're going to build more homes, take away all the planning controls and allow people to build what and where they want, what you then have is simply a field day for speculators. People buying homes to not live in, but to have as investments. People who've got will get more, and people who've got nothing won't get anything out of this. And so understanding that the housing market is not a normal market, and that the reason we're in this mess is in no small part down to the fact we have treated it like a normal market. We have an unfettered or an insufficiently fettered free market when it comes to the development of new housing. That is the problem. We look at areas like mine. So, for example, in Appleby at the moment, new houses being proposed, likely to be developed at some point soon. As things stand, not a single one of those will be affordable. And my concern is, as somebody who's actively fought, and indeed risked losing votes over the years, for new homes to be built, it causes me great concern when I see estates going up, 100 houses being built, maybe 20 are affordable, bracket, are they really affordable? And those other 80, yes, they'll sell, there's demand for them, but there wasn't need. There wasn't need. And so I'm happy to kind of, go into the trenches and fight, even to be unpopular, for new homes to be built if they're needed. I'm fed up of seeing developments that are basically a waste of bricks. Very nice bricks, in nice places, nice part of the country, but we didn't need them. It will just end up being a second home or an investment or an Airbnb for somebody, like I say, who didn't need it. Meanwhile, we've got families living locally who are hanging on by their fingernails, and as we see long-term lets being turned into Airbnbs and people being evicted, then what you then get is those families just having to leave the area altogether, which is completely and totally miserable. And I've seen that happening from Kirkby Stephen to Kendal to Grange Overstands, Ambleside, Windermere, right across my patch. This eviction and expulsion of local families because of this move from long-term let to short-term let. So when we build new homes, they have to meet those people's needs, not the desires of people who've got tons of money and live nowhere near Cumbria. When we're talking about affordable housing, it's so important that in planning law we begin to redefine what that actually means. Affordable homes can count as being something that's 80% of market value. So you build a house worth 500 grand just outside Kendal, and it goes for 400 grand. Well, I'm sorry, that doesn't help anybody, at least not anybody normal, and it doesn't help our local economy. So let's be clear that affordable is genuinely affordable. Otherwise, it becomes a completely abused term and means absolutely nothing. I think we need a new rebirth of social housing. The Right Honourable Gentleman talked about Harold Macmillan, to whom we owe a massive debt in terms of his support of the building of council housing. Whatever we call social rented housing, public housing today, we need loads more of it. And we need to not do it in a kind of drip, drip, drip sort of bottom-up way, which is permitted at the moment. The government's got to act as the developer, not even of last resort, but perhaps of first resort, and start investing, backing local authorities and housing associations with public money to make sure we build the homes that we need in the places that we need, so that we have communities that are viable. And so families like those living in areas like mine actually have the ability to cling on, to live in those areas, and do more than cling on, but to thrive and be centres of the communities in the future. I think the answer to that is that, to this problem, is in the end, not the absence and the removal of planning powers. Actually, conversely, we need more. I am blessed with having 3 planning authorities in my constituency. So we have the Yorkshire Dales, the Lake District, and then the other beautiful bits of Westmoreland and Furness Council not in either of the national parks. What we have seen empirically over the years is where you are really, really specific and often really very, very prescriptive about the kind of housing that we need in our area, and particularly in the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales, you will get planners grumbling for a few months and years about the fact that we'll only allow affordables to be built, only allow social rented housing to be built, or shared ownership, or local occupancy housing. They will grumble, and then they'll realise that's the only game in town, and then they will build. And that's how things work. The problem is the lack of certainty will very often lead to more speculation and land banking and achieving actually nothing. When we know that there's, generally speaking, any given time, a million homes with planning permission that are not built, we realise that it's not the lack of freedom in the planning market that's the issue, planning regime that's an issue. It's perhaps sometimes not being specific enough. So some specific powers we would need. I think local authorities should be given the power to enforce 100% affordability, particularly in areas like ours of extreme pressure in rural communities. We also need to make sure that whilst it's commendable, by the way, that the government is now moving towards, we believe, turning short-term lets into a separate category of planning use, so that we can make sure that we maintain long-term homes available for communities like ours. I really, really, really urge the Minister to look again at something I proposed during the Levelling Up Bill committee stage and on the floor of the House, and that is to make the same arrangements for second homes. Second homes should also be a separate category of planning use, so we can make have a limit on the numbers that there are in any given community to protect full-time occupancy of other housing. And then also, as the my honourable friend who's just left his place from Strangford said earlier on, new powers are useless without a planning department that's well resourced. And planners are really important people, gifted people. We need more of them, and we don't need to be in a situation where they're so beleaguered and run ragged by people who know that if they break the rules they can get away with doing that. So enforcement is absolutely vital. So I would say if we're going to build the homes we need, and we desperately do, then we need to be really tight and clear about what are the homes we need. Not the homes that there may be demand for, that people will speculate over and have as personal investments and land banking and all the rest of it, but making sure that we build the homes that Britain actually needs, that our communities in Cumbria actually needs, that we do indeed provide the infrastructure first so that there is space for them. Let's think of communities that we most serve by building new homes. I think of Hawkshead, a brilliant primary school there, but does not have the numbers that it should have. Why? Because we've just not built the affordable social rented homes in that community that we desperately need, and I'm committed to working with the school and the local community and the local councillor, Suzanne Pender, in making sure we achieve that in the coming months and years. But when we do see new development, let's also make sure we do build infrastructure. So very often we'll see the water company saying, for instance, we don't need to invest in any more sewage infrastructure, any additional capacity, just go ahead and build. And because they're a statutory consultee, the planners have to kind of nod that through. We should hold the water companies to greater account when it comes to planning processes, so they're not giving a green light to something that actually needed investment, their investment, and that's why they give the green light, of course. But in the end, a home that you can rely on, a home that you can afford, a home that is safe and secure, yours for years to come, to raise a family if you choose, to work from, to retire into. These are the essential building blocks of being part of a civilised society. And without that kind of a secure home, we're robbed of our basic freedoms. And so our community is then based upon a range of people who have those freedoms and live together in community to work them out together. And our communities, beautiful as they are in the lakes and the dales and in the rest of Cumbria, will not survive unless we support the building of new homes that are genuinely affordable to meet the needs of local people. But we also make sure that the homes that are built are used for what they were built for, and not just investments for those who will never live there. Thank you.
Daniel Kaczynski.
In May of this year, I will have completed 19 years' service as a Conservative Member of Parliament representing my constituency. And I think for me, on reflecting back on those 19 years, I think the planning system, the current planning system and the ramifications of it are one of the greatest concerns for me and many of my constituents. And I'd like to highlight a particular very important infrastructure project in my constituency, because as a Conservative, the thing that I'm most interested in is value for money for taxpayers. And we've been talking about Shrewsbury, of course, a beautiful town in Shropshire, more listed buildings than any other town in England. Tourism is extremely important for us. It's our #1 income generator. But it's a very historic town, which was built hundreds of years ago. And it's struggling to cope with the huge increase in house building and people moving into our community. We've been talking about completing the ring road around Shrewsbury for 50 years. And I was approached by the Shrewsbury Business Chamber some years ago. The late Graham Galliers, the head of Shrewsbury Business Chamber, came to see me and said, the one thing you need to do as the Member of Parliament is to secure the funding to complete the ring road around Shrewsbury, because that is at the very centre of economic sustainability for your constituency. I used my position in the House of Commons to lobby for funding for the completion of the ring road. It's basically 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock has been missing. So the ring road is there, but 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock has been missing for 50 years. And completing 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock will actually free up the whole north-western segment of Shrewsbury, which is undeveloped. And the construction of this ring road will be the catalyst for a massive private sector investment in that vacant, empty northwest segment of Shrewsbury. I was delighted when the then Secretary of State for Transport came to see me in February 2019. I repeat that date, February 2019. Exactly, actually, slightly more now than 5 years ago. He came to see me in the House of Commons chamber and said, good news, you've got the funding for the North West Relief Road. That was 5 years ago. I live in Coton Hill in the centre of Shrewsbury, and I see the extraordinary congestion that takes place in my town. It now takes, we're a small county town, but it takes over an hour to get from one end of Shrewsbury to another because of the huge amount of congestion. And of course, as I've said before, massive construction. There's a huge flow of young professional couples leaving the Black Country and moving into Shrewsbury. Working practices are changing very rapidly. Why live in Birmingham or Wolverhampton or the Black Country when you can live in beautiful Shropshire and bring your family there and enjoy the countryside? So people are starting to move to rural areas like ours and then commute intermittently towards Birmingham and inner city conurbations. And so this flow of people will only continue as it has been coming into Shrewsbury and Shropshire. So 5 years ago I secured this funding, and over the last 5 years I have watched the ping pong that's been taking place between Shropshire Council, my democratically elected local council, Conservative council, which is elected by people and accountable to the local people. I've watched the ping pong between Shropshire Council and the Environment Agency, each side blaming the other for the extraordinary delays that have been taking place in trying to get this project through the planning process and for construction to start. In my frustration as to what was going on, I said nothing for the first year. I said nothing for the second year. I watched with increasing desperation and concern, but I said nothing for the first year, nothing for the second year, nothing for the third year. Well, eventually I said, I can't allow this to continue. I must intervene. So I asked to see the new chief executive of the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency, of course, share the building, the Home Office building just round the corner. And I wrote to the new chief executive of the Environment Agency, Mr. Duffy, who had worked as a civil servant at the Treasury and now has become the chief executive of the Environment Agency. And I asked him in a polite letter whether I could meet with him and bring some of my councillors, the portfolio for highways. Initially, I was told that he would only see me, that he refused to see my councillors. And we went through a bit of an argy-bargy in order to ensure that they were ultimately the portfolio holder for highways, and others were able to join me. And this is all about the construction of a bridge over the River Severn, because the North West Relief Road, there's a segment of the road where we need to build a bridge which goes across the River Severn. And of course, this bridge, and as with so many other construction projects, there is no alternative, this bridge comes relatively close to an aquifer from which drinking water is taken for the people of Shrewsbury. And that is why I am told there are such significant delays. But do we need, I mean, I'm going to say something controversial, and there will be a lot of people who violently disagree with me, but then again, that's politics and that's democracy. But do we need these quangos? Do we need the Environment Agency? Yes, of course we do. I see some snorting and guffawing from the opposition benches. Of course we do. Of course we need the Environment Agency. We need the Environment Agency in order to work with us and our authorities on mitigating flooding. I chair a caucus of 38 Conservative members of Parliament who have the River Severn flowing through their constituencies, Britain's longest river. We're working in a very constructive way with the Environment Agency and the River Severn Partnership to try to lobby collectively for additional resources to tame Britain's longest river. Yes, I see a relevance in that. But do we need this sort of level of interference from an unelected, unaccountable, and clearly lacking in transparency organisation to scrutinise a democratically elected council that is responsible to the people of Shrewsbury, that is elected, that can be thrown out by the electorate if they make a mistake, an environmental mistake? They've hired some of the best advisors, environmental advisors, construction companies to try to build this bridge. Can we afford, as a nation, this level of excessive engagement between the Environment Agency and a democratically elected council? I would argue we don't. I would argue that I actually trust the local council with all of its resources, all of its good intentions, with local councillors who are part of the community, local councillors who drink the water that we take from the aquifer, local councillors who are elected and accountable to the people. Can we entrust our councils to make these decisions and to build essential infrastructure projects for our constituents, or do we need this outside body? And of course, at the end of the day, what worries me more than anything else is that I secured £58 million for this road in February 2019. £58 million. Now, I think the end project is going to cost about 140 million, or maybe 150 million. Now, that's just my project in Shrewsbury. I think we're going to be spending an extra £100 million on this project as a result of the massive delays that have taken place. And if this is being replicated across the United Kingdom, which I know it is, and I've spoken to other Conservative MPs who have their own serious concerns about the lack of engagement from the Environment Agency, then we're really starting a process of massive additional costs which are going to be very difficult to meet. And it's this lack of urgency. I can show you, Mr. Betts, a file 7 inches thick of my correspondence with the Environment Agency over the last 5 years on this one project. If you'd like, I can show you the 7-inch thick file of all the correspondence that I've got into with the Environment Agency on this one project. So I'm very unhappy with that, and I'd like the Minister to know that I have serious concerns as to the impact on taxpayers, my local hard-working families who are paying their taxes, and yet the lack of urgency, the lack of accountability from Mr. Duffy and his officials on this matter is clearly very disturbing indeed. Now, last week, we had a very positive announcement, which is an extra £244 million designated for transport projects in Shropshire. But how have we got that £244 million. We've got it because HS2 has been stopped, has been cancelled. I was a great supporter of HS2 because I was told that one of the reasons why we didn't have a direct train service between Shrewsbury and London, the only county town in England without a direct train service to London, one of the reasons we didn't have it was lack of capacity on the network, and that HS2 was going to free up and build for future generations and increase that capacity. I think what the Victorians did is fascinating because they built not for themselves, they built for future generations. You plant the row of trees, you're not going to benefit from the shade yourself, you'll be gone, but those who follow you will benefit from the shade. And the Victorians understood that, and they built for future generations. The London metro system, which I use almost every single day, is a classic example of building for future generations. And so I was very saddened that the Prime Minister ultimately decided to scrap the project, but cognizant that there was no alternative because of the huge additional costs for this project, because of NIMBYs and people who campaigned against various aspects of it, therefore leading to massive increases in costs. So we've benefited in Shropshire for an extra £244 million. Thank you very much, Treasury. I will be spending that £244 million as quickly and as expeditiously as we can in Shropshire, but we've only got it as a result of the destruction of a major national infrastructure project because of these environmentalists and NIMBYs. I think the pendulum has swung too far away from governments, from councils, from members of parliament, from people who are elected and responsible for delivering major infrastructure projects which are essential for people. I think the pendulum in our society has swung too far away from those people who are in positions of responsibility and accountability. And that pendulum has swung towards the environmentalists, the Environment Agency, the NIMBYs. And we all have thousands of NIMBYs in our constituencies. We need to recalibrate this equilibrium in order to ensure that more power is brought back to engineers, architects, designers, planners, councils, governments and members of parliament, because otherwise we are going to sink, and I want the Minister to remember this, we are going to sink into a quagmire in this country whereby we cannot build essential infrastructure projects and they will double, triple and quadruple in price. That is something which is simply unacceptable, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister as to what her intentions are to streamline and improve the planning process so that examples like my North West Relief Road do not occur in other constituencies in the future. Thank you.
Right, we now move on to the front benches.
I haven't managed to speak yet.
So I thought you were speaking for the front bench. No, you're not. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Daisy Cooper, sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr Betts. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I too thank the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland for securing this debate. If I'm perfectly honest, we have more in common than I thought we might. And that gives me great hope, and I hope that we might continue to work together on the reforms on which we do agree. Now, the Liberal Democrats are also committed to an overhaul of this broken top-down planning system. There were amendments that I personally supported to the Levelling Up Bill that would give councils the powers to force land bankers to build or sell. Unfortunately, that didn't go through. We also supported amendments that would give local councils the power to regulate Airbnb, something that is so important to my constituency in St Albans. And also, I have been running a campaign to get the government to scrap the cap on planning fees. That means that my constituents are subsidising big developers, and our planning department has been left woefully underfunded. It's really disappointing that those amendments weren't accepted to the Levelling Up Bill. But today I want to focus on the failed top-down approach to setting housing targets. Now, in the Liberal Democrats, we have an ambition to build 380,000 homes per year, but we would ensure they were built in the right places and having the right homes by adopting a bottom-up approach. We would require councils to start by addressing their local housing need and identifying any local constraints. And the approach would include ensuring that 150,000 homes each year would be truly affordable homes for social rent. And I'm delighted that our approach is supported by research from the National Housing Federation, Crisis and Heriot-Watt University. Today, though, I would like to take some time to interrogate recent reforms to the National Planning Policy Framework, and I intend to challenge the Minister to clarify whether the reforms that her government have announced in December have in fact been incorporated into the NPPF at all. Now, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to members of the House and the Minister that I take a keen interest in the proposals to update the NPPF. The Minister will know that I've tabled scores of parliamentary questions, secured debates, responded to various consultations and tabled amendments to the Levelling Up Bill. And I've been quite clear that the current government policy and the NPPF itself does nothing to solve the housing crisis. But what it does do is it incentivises developers to destroy great swathes of precious agricultural land, natural habitat and green open spaces on the metropolitan green belt. The root of the problem is the government's top-down housing targets. Top-down housing targets that are based on out-of-date population data and which councils are required to meet irrespective of any local constraints. Now, in the new NPPF, there is no clear guidance at all about whether those top-down targets or preserving the undeveloped greenbelt space for future generations should take precedence, and that is quite confusing. So let's look at the history of this particular issue. In 2015, the Minister of State for Housing and Planning took steps to address this issue in a written ministerial statement. He said, and I quote, "Unmet need is unlikely to clearly outweigh harm to the greenbelt and any other harm so as to establish very special circumstances in respect of permitting development on the greenbelt." So in this 2015 ministerial statement, there was a very clear instruction to local planning authorities and to the planning inspector that the protection of undeveloped greenbelt should be given more weight than meeting housing targets. But that statement was made 9 years ago. There have been 12 Conservative housing ministers since that time. And unfortunately, not one of them has seen fit to incorporate that ministerial statement and that principle into the NPPF. That remarkable state of affairs has meant that the Planning Inspectorate has never been able to give that ministerial statement any weight at all when deciding on planning appeals. And nor has the Planning Inspectorate had the ability to apply that same principle to their examination of local plans. And in fact, the Planning Inspector said as much in a planning appeal that was heard for a particular application in my constituency of Coney Heath that has resulted in the wrong homes being built in the wrong place. Now, as a consequence, many councils aren't able to meet these top-down housing targets without surrendering undeveloped greenbelt land for development. In St Albans, the Minister will know that we now, unfortunately, have the oldest adopted local plan in England. 2 previous drafts, developed under Conservative administrations, were rejected by the Planning Inspector. Since 2019, the Liberal Democrat administration has prioritised the local plan process. It's been put under the auspices of the leader of the council. And in recent months, the District Council has made significant progress by completing a call for sites, producing a draft local plan and completing a Regulation 18 consultation. But the government's top-down approach has a real impact in St Albans, and this is the situation that our District Council now faces. The government standard method produces a top-down target of approximately 14,000 homes that need to be built within the St Albans district. The government's approach at the moment does not allow for any reduction in that top-down target, even though we have accepted or we have been given a government-imposed strategic rail freight interchange the size of 3.5 million square metres of greenbelt, equivalent to 490 football pitches, which could instead have potentially accommodated between 2,500 and 3,000 homes. Following the District Council's call for sites and the Regulation 18 consultation, it is thought that only around 5,000 homes can be accommodated on brownfield or grey belt sites. Around 9,000 homes will need to be built on previously undeveloped green belt. Now, the District Council is working at pace to put a plan in place, but the combined failure of the government to embed that written ministerial statement into the MPPF and the failure of previous administrations in St Albans to develop a local plan now means that the council is currently unable to defend itself and its communities from inappropriate speculative development. And as a result, developers have mostly won their cases by appealing to the Planning Inspectorate. St Albans District remains unable to prevent the wrong houses being built in the wrong place. Just in the last year, for example, in 2022 to 23, most of the housing built in our district was 4, 5 or 6 bedroom executive housing, not the 3-bedroom homes that we desperately need. Now, after months of delay, hopes were raised that an updated national planning policy framework would finally address the scandal of local plans being required to meet these centrally produced top-down housing targets as produced by the so-called standard method. And in St Albans, our council leader took the Secretary of State's promises at face value. Our council leader said, if the new national planning policy framework is changed, such that the protection of undeveloped metropolitan greenbelt takes precedence over top-down targets, then our draft local plan will change as well. But it seems to me that the changes to the MPPF actually make the situation worse. Now, the Secretary of State said on the 19th of December, and I quote, he said that, and I quote, the changes will provide clearer protection for the greenbelt. He said, in summary, the new MPPF will facilitate flexibility for local authorities in relation to local housing need. He said, we clarified that a local lock on any changes to greenbelt boundaries. And he said, the government is ensuring it is clear there is generally no requirement on local authorities to review or alter greenbelt boundaries if this would be the only way to meet housing targets, to meet housing need. These are all things that the Secretary of State said on the 19th of December. But I've read the new National Planning Policy Framework, and I'm afraid it says absolutely no such thing. Rather than softening the need to meet these top-down targets, the changes to the MPPF actually reinforce and strengthen the requirement of councils and their communities to meet these top-down targets. There are at least 5 examples that I can find. Paragraph 15 changes the requirement from addressing the targets to meeting them. That is a significant change in firming up the requirement. Paragraph 60 adds a new requirement that the overall aim of any local plan is to meet as much of an area's identified housing need as possible. Again, a significant firming up of meeting that top-down target. Paragraph 61 codifies the government's previous position that the standard method is an advisory starting point, but the meaning of that word advisory is not clarified. It is widely understood in the planning sector that advisory does not mean it is merely a suggestion. It's actually a warning. It's a warning that if this target is not met, then the planning inspector will almost certainly throw out and fail any local plan that fails to meet that target. On paragraph 61, the accompanying footnote 25 restricts the circumstances which might permit deviation from the standard method to extreme examples such as island communities with no land bridge. It appears to deliberately stay silent on undeveloped greenbelt constraints. And paragraph 145 had, in the version that the government put out for consultation, it had the strongest and clearest indication that, and I quote, greenbelt boundaries are not required to be reviewed and altered if this would be the only means of meeting the objectively assessed need for housing over the plan period. But inexplicably, to those who expected that revision to strengthen greenbelt protection, this change was scrapped altogether in the final version of the MPPF. Indeed, Mr. Chair, there is not one single statement anywhere in the MPPF which indicates to the planning authorities or the planning inspector that more weight can or should be given to protect undeveloped greenbelt over top-down housing targets. Not one. Now, planning professionals agree that at best, the new NPPF brings nothing to greenbelt communities. And it was reported that one very senior and respected planning barrister who attended a Hertfordshire Infrastructure and Development Board meeting on the 29th of February described the government's changes as nothing more than window dressing. Now, St Albans District Council have proceeded with their local plan making in compliance with the previous version of the NPPF in the expectation that the government would honour their promise to give councils more power and give them the ability to protect parts of undeveloped greenbelt land. But it's clear that those promises have now been broken. I'm told that the Liberal Democrat administration has followed the advice of the Local Government Association, the Planning Advisory Service, the Planning Inspectorate, their own KC and external experts acting as critical friends. And in effect, they have all told the council the same thing. You must meet this top-down target or you are at risk of your local plan being failed. Now, without a local plan, communities in St Albans will continue to end up with our natural environment bulldozed over for inappropriate and oversized executive homes, with no way for them to require developers to provide the 3-bed family homes our district so desperately needs. Indeed, the draft local plan which the District Council has prepared has identified that more than 50% of the new homes in the area have to be 3-bedroomed homes, and yet we have no way of making sure that developers build them at the moment. So there is now a limited window of opportunity for the government to intervene and to clarify whether St Albans District Council can move forward with the draft local plan which revises the top-down housing targets downwards in recognition of our local constraints. So to sum up, Mr Chair, I have 3 questions for the Minister. Will the Minister confirm today whether the government-imposed strategic rail freight interchange, the size of 490 football pitches, which prevents the building of 2,500 to 3,000 homes, can be taken into account? Secondly, on the 9th of January, the Minister of State for Housing, Planning and Building Safety responded to my written question on the issue of the Greenbelt to say the government would consider whether updates were needed to planning practice guidance in due course. Can the Minister today confirm whether that consideration has been completed, and if not, when it will? And my third and final question, will the government urgently provide updated guidance for local authorities and the planning inspector, making it clear that the protection of undeveloped greenbelt sites, not the grey belt, the undeveloped greenbelt sites, can be considered an exceptional circumstance which justifies an alternative approach to assessing housing need? Now, Mr Chair, since the new year, I have tabled a total of 12 written questions asking for clarity on these issues, and so far not one of them has received a satisfactory response. Instead, I have been redirected back to the very statements on which I am trying to seek clarification. My constituents deserve straightforward answers on the government's intentions, and I do hope the Minister will take the opportunity to provide substantive responses today. Thank you.
Okay, we now move on to the front benches for Labour. Matthew Pennicott.
Thank you, Mr Betts. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. Can I congratulate the member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland on securing this important debate and commend him for the characteristic clarity with which he set out his position in opening it. I'd also like to thank the members for Shrewsbury, St Albans and Westmoreland and Lonsdale for their contributions. I didn't agree with all of their points for reasons I may come on to, but I certainly agreed with the need to focus the planning system on prioritising genuinely affordable social rented homes, an issue the Honourable Gentleman knows I've spoken about at length, not least in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill committee stages, the many weeks of those stages, but also, as was mentioned, the importance of properly resourcing individual local planning departments, which is a huge challenge at present. Mr Betts, I think the member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland would accept that on most matters there is a profound political gulf between us. Yet such is the mess that this government have got themselves into when it comes to national planning policy of late that we have found common cause on a number of specific issues related to it. The most obvious point of agreement between the Honourable Gentleman and the opposition front bench, or no, not the Honourable Lady, I'm sad to say, is on the need for enforceable housing targets. He recognises, as we do, that to get anywhere near the government's target of 300,000 homes a year, let alone the annual level of housing supply that England actually requires, we must have mandatory targets that bite on individual local planning authorities. And as a result of the revised National Planning Policy Framework published on the 19th of December last year, it is an unassailable fact that we no longer have such targets in England. While it's correct to say, Mr Betts, that a small number of the initial proposals in the NPPF consultation were ultimately abandoned, for example, damaging proposed revisions to the tests of soundness, many others were implemented, including the softening of land supply and delivery test provisions, the emphasis on locally prepared plans providing for, quote, sufficient housing only, and the listing of various local characteristics that can now be used to justify a deviation from the standard method for assessing local housing need. As a result, the standard method is now explicitly only an advisory starting point. And the predictable result, as ministers surely knew would be the case when they made the concessions in question to the so-called Planning Concern Group of Tory backbenchers in December 2022, is that a growing number of councils, with local plans at an advanced stage of development, more often than not in areas of high unmet need, are scrambling to reverse ferret and take advantage of the freedom the revised NPPF provides to plan for less housing than their nominal local targets imply. The government's manifesto commitment to 300,000 homes a year thus remains alive, but in name only, abandoned in practice but not formally abolished, and no amount of protestations to the contrary by ministers will alter that fact. As the member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland has rightly argued in the past, the decision to overhaul national planning policy in this way was, and I quote him, disastrous. It was, as we know, a decision made not in the national interest, but as a grubby concession to government backbenchers who were threatening to derail the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. It was nothing less than a woeful abdication of responsibility. It must be undone, and a Labour government will act decisively and early to ensure it is, so that we once again have a planning system geared toward meeting housing need in full. And that is absolutely a red line for us. Now, where we respectfully part ways with the Honourable Denton is on the issue of whether the post-war discretionary planning system is beyond redemption. As he made clear in his remarks, he firmly believes it is, and that it should be replaced by a zonal planning system of the kind proposed by the 2020 Planning for the Future White Paper, but eventually abandoned. You might notice a theme here, Mr Betts, in the face of backbench pressure from the government benches. We take a different view. While we don't dispute that after a decade of piecemeal and inept tinkering, the planning system the government are presiding over is faltering on almost all fronts, we believe that introducing an entirely new system is not the answer. Instead, we believe a discrete number of targeted changes to the existing system, coupled with decisive action to ensure that every element of it is functioning optimally, will ensure we significantly boost housing supply and deliver 1.5 million homes over the course of the next Parliament. Now, as I don't have an abundance of time, Mr Betts, let me give just one example of the kind of changes we believe are necessary to get Britain building at the scale required. And it's a change, actually, that I think might solve some of the problems the Honourable Lady identifies in relation to St Albans. Mr Betts, as you will know, there is no way to meet housing need in England without planning for growth on a larger than local scale. And yet this government, for reasons that I suspect are more ideological than practical, are now presiding over a planning system that lacks any effective sub-regional frameworks for cross-boundary planning. The limitations of the duty to cooperate were well understood, but it at least imposed a requirement on local authorities to engage constructively, actively, and on an ongoing basis to develop strategic planning policies where needed. Its repeal last year through the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, coupled with the fact that no replacement has been brought forward, leaves us with no meaningful process for planning strategically across boundaries to meet unmet housing need, given the inherent flaws of voluntary spatial development strategies. Indeed, the government have even removed from the NPPF now the requirement to help neighbouring authorities accommodate development in instances where they cannot meet their area's objectively assessed needs. If we're to overcome housing delivery challenges around towns and cities with tightly drawn administrative boundaries, we must have an effective mechanism for cross-boundary strategic planning, and a Labour government will introduce one. That is just one example of the kind of planning reform we believe is necessary. Others include finally getting serious about boosting local plan coverage. It is appalling that we have a local plan-led system where nearly 3/4 of local plans are now not up to date. That cannot be allowed to continue. Another example is reintroducing a strategic approach to greenbelt release rather than the haphazard free-for-all we've had for the past 14 years. But the important point, Mr Betts, is that we should be focused on bold evolution of the planning system in England, not a complete dismantling of it, not least because the painstaking creation of an entirely new system, after 4 years of planning policy turbulence and uncertainty in the wake of the 2020 White Paper, would almost certainly paralyse housing delivery and further exacerbate the sharp decline in house building that is now underway. Reform of the planning system, rather than a revolutionary reconstruction of it, is what is needed. And so Labour remains committed to an ambitious yet pragmatic and achievable overhaul of the current system and much needed policy certainty and stability once that overhaul is complete. I finish by arguing the following, Mr Betts. As much as the member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland might wish otherwise, it is patently clear that this government has not only squandered the opportunity to make the planning system work as needed, but in caving into the demands of its backbenchers 15 months ago, has actively made things worse, as the latest planning application statistics released last week make very clear. We need a general election so that they can make way for a Labour government that will do what is necessary to tackle the housing crisis and boost economic growth.
Minister.
Thank you, and it is a great pleasure to respond to this debate and serve under your chairmanship, Mr Betts. I want to thank the Honourable Member for Middlesbrough South and East Cleveland for securing today's important debate and for his very eloquent presentation. I would also like to thank the Honourable Member for Shrewsbury and Atcham for his impassioned pleas on behalf of his constituency, and also to thank the members from Westmoreland and Lonsdale and St Albans. Let me make it very clear that this government is committed to modernising our planning system, and this government is absolutely committed to building more homes. In our manifesto, we had a commitment to build 1 million more houses, and we are on track to do that during the course of this Parliament. We have an advisory target of 300,000. We have not achieved that. However, and let me make this very, very clear, in the last 30 years, the highest 4 years of house building have been since 2018. So our performance is strong.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. The Minister indicated that the new MPF uses the word advisory. Now, the government had always used the word advisory. I note that the Honourable Member for Greenwich and Woolwich, responding for the opposition, says that advisory is a softening of the targets, but certainly the advice that my local council has received from the Local Government Association, the Planning Advisory Service, the Planning Inspectorate, their own KC, is that advisory is a warning that if you don't meet that number, then your local plan will likely get failed. So could the Minister please commit today to provide further guidance on what the government intends by that word advisory?
We are very clear that we want to see 300,000 more homes being built in England every year. That is very, very clear. What we have said is that we have an advisory starting point for each local authority. And to answer your question that you posed earlier, the framework sets out very clearly that while changes to green belt boundaries may be made where exceptional circumstances are evidenced and justified, there is no firm requirement to do so. But if there are exceptional circumstances, then there can be development on the green belt. I really want to make some progress. So we are absolutely committed to modernising our planning system. We have introduced the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act to enable radical improvements in the way planning works. There are numerous measures in the Act and future supporting policy and regulation that will modernise the system, making it more efficient, effective and accessible. Local leaders will also have greater powers and necessary tools to regenerate town centres and bring land and property into productive use, as well as support growth, the delivery of quality homes and environmental improvements. Underpinning this, the government believes decisions about development should be driven by sensible local decision-making, supported by digital tools to make engagement easier and bring the current system into the 21st century. More local plans must be in place, and I agree with the honourable gentleman on that point, to deliver the homes and infrastructure people need in the places that they want to live and work. In addition, the Levelling Up Secretary has set out his ambition for planning performance. It is now up to those who make the planning system work, local authorities, the Planning Inspectorate and statutory consultees, to expedite delivery. We are committed to building more homes, more quickly, more beautifully and more sustainably. And we must build homes in the places where people want to live and work. The parties opposite talk a very, very good game, but the proof is all in the delivery. I am a London MP, and it really saddens me that under the Labour Mayor of London in 2022, London had the worst delivery of new houses of any area in the country. We compare that to the West Midlands under the Conservative Andy Street, and he actually exceeded his targets.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way, but will she agree with, I speak as an immigrant to this country. We left communist Poland in 1978. But will she agree with me that getting levels of immigration down to sustainable levels will also help in this crisis affecting housing, because of a lot of the pressure on the housing stock is coming from people coming from overseas to the United Kingdom?
I think that we have to acknowledge that a lot of the settlement into the UK has been exceptional over the course of the last 2 years, whether it is Hong Kongers, Ukrainians. But I do agree with you in terms of the arithmetic, that if you have big levels of inward migration, then you do need the housing to house the inward migration. So I do agree with you on the basis of arithmetic, absolutely. Yes.
I'm glad to hear her recommit to the government's housing target of 300,000 homes a year. She says the government is committed to delivering that. Does it not concern the Minister that in the wake of the changes to the NPPF, councils across England, I think an example would be North Somerset, are using the exceptional circumstances test in that revised NPPF to determine lower housing targets than are defined through the government's standard method, i.e., the NPPF will result in less housing than the standard method implies, and that there's no way that the government can now meet its 300,000 homes a year target on that basis. She surely must recognise that.
We have been very clear that our target is 300,000, but we want local communities to buy in. And it is very much so an objective, as my right honourable friend has laid out very, very clearly. We need the new housing, and that is why government is committed. Yes.
Just very quickly, will you join me in challenging the Labour Party? They claim that they're going to, come in on the white horse and resolve all of this. In practicality, we've seen what the socialist mayor of London and how he has failed to build houses. Does she join me in expressing reservation as to the silence from the Labour Party in questioning the failure of their mayor of London in providing essential homes?
I 100% agree with you. The proof is in the delivery. And the Mayor of London in 2022 was the worst performing region in terms of housing delivery. And we have had an independent review conducted of London housing delivery. And this independent review makes it absolutely clear that the Mayor has failed to deliver housing running at 15,000 new homes per year, according to his own plan. If you compare it to the actual need in London, it is multiples of that, and it is clear under-delivery. But let me make some progress. Okay, I'll take this final intervention because I do need to get quite a few things on the record.
I am incredibly grateful to the Minister for giving way again. I think what recent interventions have shown is that there's a huge amount of confusion and contradiction about what the changes to the MPPF actually mean. Now, a cynic could say that, you know, the government is saying one thing and doing another, but I think it's really important for communities around the country that we do have clarity. So could she please commit for the government to actually produce further guidance on what they mean by exceptional circumstances from the standard method? And will she please commit, I ask again, to provide further guidance on the definition of the word advisory?
I think I have been very, very clear in what I have said on the Green Belt, and that the Green Belt should be protected unless in exceptional circumstances. And I think that has been set out. So let me make progress. So the Levelling Up Bill will speed up the planning process, delivering a faster and more efficient system and cut out unnecessary and costly delays. It will ensure that local plans are shorter, more visual and map-based, built on open and standardised data. They will be concise, focused on locally important matters with repetition of policies across plans eliminated. New mandatory gateway assessments will reduce the time spent examining plans, and to ensure plans are prepared more quickly and kept up to date on matters including housing supply, there will be a 30-month preparation timeframe and a requirement for councils to commence plan updates every 5 years. And just in relation to the Honourable Lady from St Albans, I have to put it on the record that St Albans is one of the oldest plans in the country. It has been designated. And to be honest, I do not know how the Liberal Democrats can stand up and say you've got a housing target of 380,000 per year when you object to every single development on the ground. I just do not get it. So let me move on. We've had quite a lot of talk on nutrient neutrality. I must say, I was hugely disappointed that the opposition in the House of Lords blocked the government amendments in the Act, which would have made a targeted and specific change to the law, so that there was absolute clarity that housing development could proceed in areas currently affected by nutrient neutrality. This has been at a cost of 100,000 new homes. It is unacceptable to talk the talk and not to deliver. The opposition did not deliver in the House of Lords. No, I've made it quite clear that I want to put points on the record. However, the government continues to work to unlock housing in catchments affected by nutrient neutrality. To address pollution at the source, the Act created a new duty for water companies in designated catchments to ensure wastewater treatment works serving a population equivalent to over 2,000 meet specified nutrient removal standards. Competent authorities are then required to consider that this standard will be met by the upgrade date for the purposes of habitats regulations assessments, significantly reducing the mitigation burden on development. We are also boosting the supply of mitigation by making 110 million available through the Local Nutrient Mitigation Fund to help planning authorities in affected areas deliver tens of thousands more homes before the end of the decade. Funding will be recycled locally until nutrient mitigation is no longer needed, at which point it will be used for measures to help restore the relevant habitat sites. The fund has already allocated 57 million to 8 local authorities, and round 2 of the fund opened for expressions of interest last week. And the honourable member, who's no longer in her seat, from Somerton and Frome, raised nutrient neutrality, and I just want to make it clear that Somerset was allocated £9.6 million. Building on the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, we consulted on a range of proposed changes to national planning policy to support our objective of a planning system that delivers the new homes we need while taking account of important areas, assets, or local characteristics that should be protected or respected. We have revised the NPPF to be clearer about the importance of planning for homes and other development that our communities need. It provides clearer protection for the Greenbelt, clarity on how future housing supply should be assessed and plans, and certainty on the responsibility of urban authorities to play their full part in meeting housing needs. We removed the need to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply requirement where plans are up to date, providing local authorities with yet another strong incentive to agree a local plan, giving communities more of a say on development and allowing more homes to be built. To make sure that we maximise the potential of brownfield sites, we are consulting on strong new measures to boost house building while protecting the Greenbelt. Under these plans, planning authorities are instructed to be more flexible in applying policies that halt house building on previously developed land. Permitted development rights are extended, and those in England's 20 largest towns and cities will be subject to a brownfield presumption when they fail to deliver. The government is clear that having plans in place is the best way to deliver development in the interests of local communities, and the revised framework creates clear incentives for authorities to get their local plans in place. Alongside this, the government remains on track to meet our manifesto commitment to deliver 1 million homes over this Parliament. We've announced a £10 billion investment in housing supply since the start of this Parliament to support bringing forward land for development, creating the infrastructure and enabling the market to deliver the homes that communities need, and supporting local authority planning capacity. This includes the £1 billion Brownfield Infrastructure and Land Fund launched in July 2023, which will unlock approximately 65,000 homes and target at least 60% of funding to brownfield land. So in the interest of time, and I want to give my honourable friend, right honourable friend who sponsored the debate some time to sum up, I want to say very, very clearly that this government is committed to housing delivery, and we are on track to modernise the planning system so that we can achieve that housing delivery.
Mr. Simon Clark, 2-1.
Thank you, Mr. Betts, and I'd like to thank the Minister for her gracious comments at the end there about giving me some time to respond. I think it has been a very good debate, and actually a remarkably, despite the proximity of an election, consensual debate actually about a number of the issues which we know we need to overcome if we are to build the homes we need as a country. Clearly there are areas of contention, and clearly there are big challenges which require significant political courage to be addressed. But to very briefly give credit to those who spoke in the debate, I agreed with the honourable gentleman for Westminster and Lonsdale about the importance of allowing local planning departments to be sufficiently resourced to do their job. I have more faith than he does in the ability of the market to fix these problems, but that's probably not an unusual distinction. I thank the honourable gentleman for Shrewsbury in Action for attending today's debate. I wish him every success with bringing forward the Shrewsbury Ring Road, the 9 to 12 o'clock segment. I think that This debate, although I concentrated primarily on housing, could equally well be extended to infrastructure. We know we need to allow ourselves to build the things that we need in order to succeed, and addressing some of the obstacles that have progressively accreted so that they stop us doing things which we know are in the national and often local interest as well, is something that the government does need to address. The Honourable Lady for St Albans, I welcome the ambition she set out for 380,000 homes a year. I do think that that is something which needs to be underpinned by robust methodology in terms of clear national targets. As the Honourable Gentleman has said, local plans need to be up to date. We need to make sure that they're resourced appropriately so that they can be. The Shadow Minister, who I count as a friend in this place, he is right that there are things that we do need to do in order to give greater accountability for local authorities when it comes to their work. We disagree, obviously, on nutrient neutrality, where I do think Labour did, I'm afraid, fail to put their money where their mouth has been when it comes to the importance of house building. And finally, the Minister, I welcome the fact that we're on track for 1 million homes a year. I clearly would like to see more of that. I look forward to discussing with her as we approach the manifesto writing process about how we can best deliver that. Thank you, Mr. Best.
Order, order. We now move on to the next debate.
You're right.